this actually might be the best activity that you could possibly do when your nails are drying, frankly. So you're sitting, you're talking, you're not probably doing a secondary activity like we often like to do. So, this might be it. We might, okay. Well, I don't know if I can say.
Editor Ellie here for audio-only listeners. I held up a fidget cube that I had been playing with absentmindedly in my hand. All right, well, we better get this started and rolling because you got the Packers in about 40 minutes.
I do, but I've got my gear on. I got my football earrings. I've got Packers jersey, so I am ready to transfer from one activity to the other. So,
Excellent, excellent.
Well, let's record a podcast.
Let's record a podcast. Hello and welcome into another episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult, a neurodiversity podcast, the show where potential went to die. I'm one of your hosts, Ellie Michaels. I use she, her.
I am your other host, Jessica Michaels, and I use she, they.
And today we are still talking about ableism.
We are. There are a few things that are very important to the discussion that we weren't able to get to last episode. So we're going to pick up that discussion. And so primarily, we're going to talk about internalized ableism and how to recognize it and overcome it. And we're also going to be talking about nothing for us without us. So another way to prevent ableism by including disabled people. So that's on a slate today. Do you have a preference as to where you might want to start? My love, do we want to talk about the past couple weeks at all?
Well, like the internalized ableism about being upset with ourselves that we weren't able to keep up with a podcast at the same time as starting 2 new jobs and rearranging a bunch of the apartment because we finally had the funds and executive function to do so.
Yeah, I was thinking that might be a good place to start. So if you haven't noticed, we took a couple of weeks off. We had sort of an unplanned hiatus with a lot of things going on. A lot of good stuff, though. Very good stuff. But exhausting stuff. Took up basically all of our executive function, all of our spoons, all of our physical energy. And one thing we were not able to do is record our podcasts, which, I don't know. I think it was finally like in the middle of a week, one early weekend day that I kind of just said, we might need to stop the podcasts or something like that. And that was the first time I had even thought that was something we could do. Because it was just in my head that this is something we have to do. It's something we always do. It's important. So I sort of put it up there as a really critical thing. But then we sort of had to look at it and go, well, the time that we're working on the podcast or editing the podcast, Ellie could be finding a job, or we could be doing, this big movement of stuff. And so that's what we decided. But I can't believe how long it took me to come to that idea.
I think also there's a big chunk about like this podcast started partially as promotional material for your speaking and coaching gigs. And when that's the primary source of our income, you gotta do it. But now we both have straight jobs and we want to keep doing it, and we want to keep helping people and providing resources and whatnots. But, you got to put food on your own table first.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this podcast has always been really important to me because I know not everybody can afford coaching. Not everybody can afford having me come into their organization to speak. And so this was always my primary way of putting something out there that was potentially helpful for people. I could share my experience, share your experience, we could share ideas, and I could talk about things that have worked for me or worked for my clients for free, and I could put it out there. And so that was important because I'm a believer in, the fact that everybody should get access to whatever services they need. But again, I can't do that for everybody all the time for free. So it was a little heartbreaking to me to have to stop it for a little while. But where the internalized ableism kicks in for me, and I think for a lot of other people, is this idea that, well, we should be able to do everything. I mean, to
Hmm.
record this podcast, we're just sitting in front of a microphone for 30 minutes or whatever. How hard is that? Anybody could do that. You just get up 30 minutes earlier, you know? And that was really something that was playing in my head, this idea of I should be able to do it. It doesn't take that much energy. Other people could do it. There's other people who have podcasts that go through lots of stuff, and so it's interesting that this is the topic that we were talking about while these discussions were happening.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I mean, we rarely automatically extend the grace to ourselves that we give other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also don't consider our own circumstances and how that affects our capabilities to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's lots of people who have podcasts, but they also, as their lives change and shift, those shows have changed and shifted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Greatest Generation was 2 episodes a week for the first couple of months, and
I
then
can't imagine.
they had to drop it down to like once a week, and then they had a couple shows going at the same time, and then they had to drop it down from that. And it's just a kind of backwards and forwards thing, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's, you know, when we talk about internalized ableism, a lot of it comes from people who sort of take in all that social stigma and negative stereotypes about disability and turn that in on themselves. And for so many of us, those are things that we've gotten directly since childhood. Oh, you can
Hmm.
play video games. Why can't you do your homework? Or, oh, you're so smart. Why can't you study? You just go in and you get an A on the test. If you applied yourself, you would be able to do so much better. Um, you know, just lazy and stupid, and you're using your ADHD as a crutch, or all of those things. I know it's one of my favorite. And so I don't know how it would be possible to get through a life where you hear those things at informative years and don't end up with some degree of internalized ableism, without lots of therapy or coaching. And, I mean, I
Hmm.
don't know how,
Hmm.
but the things that, if you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if I have internalized ableism, what are some things, is there anything that you can think of right off the top of your head that you could say to somebody if they say, I don't know, do I have internalized ableism? Anything that people should watch out for?
We pretty much all have the idea of like the ideal American professional, and it's based a lot on marketing and social media influencers and lies. It's just all based on lies, and it's there to sell you something. And when you get that internalized self-talk of like, you're not doing good enough, or you're not doing enough work, or you're not working out long enough, um, try and figure out whose voice that is. Because a lot of times that's not actually your voice. That's a recording of one of your parents from 20 years ago telling you that you're being too lazy because you're not actively doing something right now while they can see you. Like, yes, I just mowed the lawn and cut down a tree and did a bunch of stuff, and now I am laying here on the couch in the air conditioning
Mm-hmm. Oh,
because breaks are good.
yeah. We have this idea that you should be able to, not only do you have that negative voice in your head that you've probably heard before, but then there's this idea that you should be comparing yourself to able-bodied standards or neurotypical standards, or whatever it
Hmm.
is that you don't acknowledge to You don't acknowledge that there are barriers for you, that there's a different situation for you than there is for those other people that you're comparing themselves to. And different is not bad, it's just different. Um, but
It's amazing how that works.
yeah, and then if you're somebody who has been masking, like a lot of us who are adults, and if you've been late diagnosed, or if you're somebody who has just really stressed fitting in, you've been concealing a lot of your traits, like the stimming, or the accepting of accommodations, or you've probably been pushing yourself to overcompensate. Like, I love it when people would say, this has happened to several of my clients and to me, where a manager or someone would say, oh, you're so organized, and in your head you're just going,
Huh?
no way. But at work, sometimes, I know that I'm going to miss something, or mess up something, or miss a deadline, or miss a detail. And so I overcompensate by becoming hyper organized.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
other people see that as a strength, but really I'm way overcompensating, use a ton of my energy to cover up this weakness that I have. And that happens with a lot of people. Um, and people, we tend to minimize disabilities often,
Mm-hmm.
especially I think with neurodiversity.
Oh,
Who,
100%.
yeah, or like if you're twice exceptional, so gifted and you have something else, like you're gifted and autistic, you're gifted in ADHD. When your whole self is built on this idea, that you've got all this potential, and you're so smart, and you're going to be so successful, and you're capable, hiding that disability side is so much more important, because what are you, or who are you, if you're not that person? So the
Mm-hmm.
shame and the guilt, and those are all part of internalized ableism.
My brain's like, I know very well and very thoroughly the neurochemistry behind my own ADHD. I understand it psychologically. I understand it medically. And still, my brain is like, oh, you're just lazy.
Mm-hmm,
If you weren't so lazy, this wouldn't be a problem. It's
mm-hmm.
like, yes, yes. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Do you think any of that comes from the idea that maybe you're not disabled enough?
I barely think I'm disabled at all most of the time. Like, I have to remember, like, no, you can't do that many things in a day.
It's part of internalized ableism, which is like, you can understand intellectually executive function, challenges, time management, time blindness, the social, the cognitive. You can understand all of those things, but when it comes to yourself, you go, oh, but those are for other people who are more disabled than me.
Mm-hmm.
I can't use those excuses, quote unquote, because I could really do it. I am not that disabled. That, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is big, especially I see that a lot more in the late diagnosed folks that I work with. But I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something that anybody could easily fall into, because there's always somebody you could compare yourself to that has things worse.
Yeah, it's not the struggle Olympics. Like, disabled is disabled. It doesn't really matter how or why. I just remembered a thing about the negative self-talk and the internalized ableism that you've picked up from other people. Um, a lot of the times, those accusatory thoughts will pop into my head, and my first response will just be like, deflect, block, flinch, don't
Mm-hmm.
even let the thought finish because it's awful. Um, and I saw somebody giving a talk about that kind of thing and about the neuroscience behind it. And you can either get the negative self-talk and then just ignore it, or you can get it and you can argue back in your head for it. But the best way for it to work is actually like stop and say the accusation out loud. Figure out who it is who you are hearing make this accusation at you about this thing that you embarrassed yourself about 15 years ago. First of all, that gives it so much less power when you actually hear it said aloud, like, hey, this thing you did when you were in your early 20s, that was sure embarrassing and dumb of you, and that upset people. Why, who cares? That was 17 years ago. But then also, you then respond out loud and you say, well, yeah, no, I was 22. I was not in a great place, and I was not in a safe living situation, and I had untreated depression and ADHD and autism and, a bunch of things I think could probably give someone who did that kind of thing a bit of grace, huh? And because you're saying it out loud and you're hearing yourself say it and you're thinking it as you're saying it, it's more powerful and can overwrite those patterns of negative self-talk.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So some of those have actually stopped coming up for me
Mm-hmm.
because I like turned, confronted it, went, yes. Like it's a big scary monster following you down the street, but you don't want to turn and look at it because it's a big scary monster. And then you turn around and it's just a dog, like a little
Yeah.
yappy dog.
So that's I probably, I don't know, what is that, reframing maybe,
Yeah.
or a way to reframe? Yeah, because one thing I challenge my clients to do, myself to do, is be as nice to yourself as you are to other people.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, give yourself as much grace as you give to others. It's the
Mm-hmm.
hardest thing to do. It's the hardest thing to
Mm-hmm.
do. But sometimes it can help to put that on, to kind of turn that around. If you were talking about someone else, and they had this going on, this going on, this going on, this going on, would the situation make a little bit more sense, or would you be as mad at another autistic person as you are in yourself at this in this moment? Can help people even get the idea that there is another way to think about it, because sometimes people are just so beaten down
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
negativity and pessimism that they cannot possibly see another possible reality, or another, they can't see a future where they could be successful, because in their past they feel like they've never been successful.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you just, I think, sometimes have to even start with the fact that there are other ways to look at things, which can be really difficult if you are really entrenched. But I love that idea of talking talking it out, actually talking it out loud as a way to help you reframe. Because yeah, sometimes when we say it out loud, it can help point out how ridiculous it is, and how these internalized thoughts often are, they're not our ideas, they're society's ideas, they're our parents' ideas,
Mm-hmm.
they're
Your bad
not.
manager.
Exactly. Yeah, your bad manager, your inexperienced manager who was never trained, who thinks they know everything but don't. Sometimes it's also too, you got to look at the source. Where is that idea coming from? Like, as you mentioned, who is that idea coming from? But even further, what the heck do they know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they, most of the time, if we're getting these unsupportive, criticisms, they're not coming from good, reliable sources. Where are they getting their information? So sometimes you could dissect where, those things are coming from, and help inform your own authentic belief and your own idea of what the situation is. I think something else that's really helpful is to listen to other people's experiences. Listen to other
Mm-hmm.
when you hear other gifted kids talk about gifted kid burnout, and you
Mm-hmm.
feel for the first time like they're talking about me, or the first time you see a meme, about gifted kid burnout, and it's like, how did they know? How did they get in my brain? How did they write my soul? You know, I understand why there's a lot of criticism about neurodiversity content on social media. And I get it. I would not get my facts about neurodiversity from TikTok. However, I do think there is a lot of benefit in listening to the experiences of other people to help
Mm-hmm.
you overcome internalized ableism. Now, you got to be, I will say, take this with a grain of salt, because not everything everybody says online this is a symptom is an actual symptom, and not everything that everybody says is because of ADHD is really because of ADHD. Like, we gotta be kind of more discerning. But just finding other people that struggle the way you struggle can be
Huge.
huge. Can be huge. Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, do you remember? This to me reminds me a lot of like when you first, as if you're late diagnosed, when you first get diagnosed and you start to go, there's a reason for
Hmm.
some of this. There's a reason I'm like this. This isn't my fault.
Hmm.
I'm not a terrible person, and you get a lot of that, I think, from community. So, and you don't have to find other people with the same disability. I work with people, we work with people with lots of different disabilities, physical and cognitive and mental, and just, I think getting those perspectives can be really, really helpful when it comes to
Hmm.
advocating for yourself and seeing how other people identify what their needs are and make sure those needs are met. Those types of things can help you overcome your internalized ableism, even if they're not exactly the same situations you have. You can learn a lot from other people. Is there anything else that you can think of when it comes to overcoming internalized ableism?
Um, yeah, like you and I have a number of the same disabilities, and I can use the trick of, hey, be nice to my wife, please. Where if I'm beating myself up for something that's something that you would also struggle with, or even necessarily something that was close to something you would struggle with, and I'm being mean to myself, okay, is that what you would say to Jess if she were dealing with this? Is that is that the way that you would talk to her? Well, no, of course not, because she's been. Oh,
Aha.
so
And
it's
you
similar
taught
to
me
the.
that trick.
Yeah, we
So
call
if
it
it's
out in
used
each
on you,
other
it's your
too.
own fault. It's your own fault. We do
Yeah.
call it out at each other. Yeah. And I think that's really a part of creating a supportive environment, whether that's um, connecting with peers or just having supportive friends. But your friends should lift you up in those moments. If your friends are the ones saying, well, come out, you always cancel, you always cancel plans, you can't cancel this close to what we're doing, or those are not supportive friends. You need to find
Hmm.
friends that lift you up in those moments. And it's important to advocate for yourself and advocate for whether it's acceptance and it's really accommodations, even in those private situations, accommodations and accessibility. um, and it isn't just about not beating yourself up, it's about taking positive steps and doing those things to say, like, you know what, I'm going to cancel the podcast for a couple weeks, thanks. Or asking for closed captions, or saying, I'm going to try to make it at 7, but if I'll do my best, but if I can't, sorry, and I'll catch you next time. And by asking for those accommodations and putting accessibility at the forefront, you can help kind of broadly defeat that system that has made accessibility an issue in the first place and made ableism a thing in the first place, because so much of ableism is just the way society is structured. And
Hmm.
and a lot of the way society is structured is silly, just like you said. It's imaginary, it's pretend. We think these are the rules, but who wrote the rules? Why are these the rules?
Well, like you said, a bunch of rich white cis men about 100 years ago got together and said, "This is what professional look like," and it just so happens that it looks like them.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
You know,
Yeah.
lost the
And
top hats after Kennedy, but other than that, about the same.
and another thing I think that can really help is learning about ableism and learning about disability rights. Even if you don't count yourself as being among the disabled, I think learning about the systems of like systemic oppression that and how it came to be and how it devalues the minds and brains and bodies of disabled people or people who think differently. I mean, look at all of these geniuses in history who had these life-changing ideas who were shunned and and ostracized because they thought differently. So when you learn about those types of things, again, it can help sometimes give you the confidence to advocate for things that are different. And even if you have to say, hey, I wouldn't really worry about the fact, this fact for myself, but I know that there are other people who are struggling, so I'm going to use my voice or I'm going to ask for these things, that it's okay. Like, do whatever it takes to motivate you to do the thing, do the thing.
Yeah, stuff the Marcus of Van Taylor.
That actually kind of dovetails into, when we're talking about ableism and you're talking about, well, how do I know if I'm ableist against other people, which we talked about last time? How do I recognize internalized ableism in myself? But how do I prevent ableism? Part of that is this idea of nothing for us without us. Is that a term you're familiar with?
Yeah, actually, my wife said it about an hour ago when we were talking about what we were going to talk on the show. Um, and I decided not to pursue and ask what that was because I figured I would find out in about an hour.
Fair. Okay. So, nothing about us without us is a disability rights slogan that comes with the disability movement that emphasizes that people with disabilities should be involved in the decisions that affect them. Um, it's one of those, we talked about the Gang of 19 a few weeks ago and the disability rights movement in the ADA. So it really became popular in the 90s when there was starting to be legislation about disabled people, but there were no disabled people that were involved in making the decisions. It reminds me of, have you ever seen like the memes or the pictures of those panels about like a forum on women in business and the panel is all men?
Yup.
I'll give you an example from pop culture. Okay, the film Wicked, or the musical Wicked. So it was a musical on Broadway, and then a film adaptation has been made. And one of the things that the disability community was concerned about is, will the movie have the same ending for one of the characters as it does in the musical? Because in the musical, there's a character who is in a wheelchair. And at some point in the musical, she talks to her sister and said, why didn't you ever use your power to give me the thing I want most in the world? And of course, that was to walk. And so in the musical, she's given these magical shoes that allow her to walk. And a lot of disability rights people were upset with this because, their idea was, why do you think that would be the thing that would help somebody the most? That's a very ableist mindset, that the one thing any disabled person would want would be to not be disabled, would be to be like everybody else. Why would you think that is the case? So that's been a big criticism of the musical over the years. And so and it's also one of the reasons why there have never been any people in that role on Broadway who are actual wheelchair users, because at the end of the musical they have to get up and walk and dance, so it's not really about a disabled person. So for the movie adaptation, for the first time, they actually do have a wheelchair user who is starring in that role. She's a full-time wheelchair user. And so we know, and they've alluded to the fact that this ending for this character has been changed for the movies to give that a better outcome. So that's the difference. Nothing for us without us. If you have something written by somebody who doesn't have any idea, who's just guessing, people think they know what other people need. But really, the community says, don't write about us. Don't create tools and resources for us without us being involved. Why do you think you know better than we do what we need? Why do you think you would, without knowing anything about us or our lives, why do you think you know what would help us? Because often you don't. I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and it was about the ADA. And so, when I came in, there were, right when I walked into the event, somebody greeted me. I didn't have to look around and search for signs. Somebody greeted me and said, "Are you here for the ADA event?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Great, I will walk you to the elevator." So they walked me to the elevator. They pushed the button, put me on it, and I went down, and it was right there when I got there. And it was fantastic because, it was wheelchair accessible. It was accessible for neurodivergent people in terms of, not having to read signs, but there were signs there for other people who don't want to interact, with a human. So physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, they were all kind of covered. And I was just thinking, I didn't really need to have a person greet me and take me to the elevator, but it was nice. It was cool. So it helped me a little bit, but there are other people where it could have helped a ton. Just having that little service. And it was fantastic, except downstairs where the event was, the way the tables were set up, it was tables with chairs, and the way they were arranged, if once the chairs were pushed into the tables, you could get a wheelchair through. But once people were sitting in the chairs, you couldn't get a wheelchair through. Also, there weren't spots at the tables for wheelchair users. So there were too many chairs. You had to pull chairs out of the way that he got all these chairs in. And to get up to this stage that they had, you had to move people because they didn't clear an area or a path for wheelchair users to get up to this stage, and you couldn't maneuver around the table for people to talk if they were in a wheelchair. And that's why when you say nothing for us without us, you cannot just have one voice. Because I'm guessing the person who helped arrange things was probably neurodivergent or sight impaired or something, because those needs were met perfectly. But they didn't take into consideration the things that the wheelchair users might need. And wheelchair users need accommodations, or are just as deserving of accommodations as everyone else. So either, when you are participating in planning or helping, make sure if you are, that you are collecting opinions and thinking of different perspectives from many angles and not just your own. Because yes, it's great that things are neuro-inclusive, and it's great that you rang the neurodiversity bell. But, if you're not thinking about other people or bringing in other voices or taking in other points of view, then you've perpetuated ableism against other people, even if you didn't mean to. So that's sort of nothing about us without us, is make sure we're taking in all sorts of opinions and voices, so that we're not participating in creating those systems that are accidentally oppressive, but oppressive nonetheless.
Don't make anything about us without us helping make it.
Yep.
Yeah, all right, I get it. I like it.
Yeah, cool. That's all I got.
All right. Well, let's accommodate your disability of being a sports fan and get this wrapped up.
Show pack
She's
go,
laughing.
baby.
It's
Can you hear that? Did that pick it up?
that picked up, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think that'll just about wrap it up for this episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult. Jess, where can people find out more about you?
People can find out about me at coachjessicamichaels.com. And there's a contact form on there. I do have some specials coming up for ADHD Awareness Day and Neurodiversity Employment Awareness or Disability Employment Month coming up in October. So there'll be some way to get free sessions and some sliding scale options. So if you have any questions about that, if you're interested in coaching, but finances are a challenge, just reach out and we can talk about some of those opportunities coming up.
Awesome. And if you like our show, please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe and comment nice things on YouTube, and tell any gifted kids or messy adults in your life that you think might like our show. So until next time, take care of each other out there.
Bye.
2 minutes to spare. Professional.
Nice.